Right, what's up guys? Coach Steve here, and in today's little video we are going to go over the anatomy of the deadlift. And this is going to be part 2 of my little series, so part 1 being the squat. So if you haven't checked out the squat, go check out the anatomy of the squat. So and today, yes, we're going through the deadlift. Right, so a general outline, we're going to talk about why we program a deadlift, what is the deadlift, how do we do the deadlift, how to fix the deadlift, and then we're going to just go over some common errors. Now, the deadlift can be a complex movement, even though it's very simple, the idea of picking something up off the floor, but because we are using the entire body to achieve the movement, it can get complex to figure out exactly where the weak point is. So, the contents in this video isn't completely extensive. You can probably read a textbook on the deadlift to learn all the little bits and pieces, but we're mainly going to cover some of the common issues, and hopefully by the end of this video, you can have some strategies on how you can improve your deadlift or complete the deadlift safely. So starting with why, we like to start with why. Why do we program the deadlift? Well, once again, like the squat, it's a basic functional movement. If I was to pick something up off the floor, I think of caveman Steve. I'm going to pick up a rock off the floor. I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to pick up a person off the floor. I'm going to complete a deadlift movement. We're going to talk about the main component of a deadlift movement is the hip hinge, and we know that the hips are very strong, stable structures, and it's better, more effective for our body to load weight through the hips rather than loading up into smaller joints such as our spinal segments. The deadlift builds muscle in the whole body, so we know that it's a strong and powerful posterior chain exercise, and compare that to the squat, which would be more anterior chain, meaning the front of the body, deadlift, posterior chain being the back of the body. So, we're working a lot through the hamstrings, a lot through the glutes, the spinal erectors or the erector spinae, holding an isometric concentration, meaning that they're not moving. So your muscles in your back are fighting really hard to not move and to hold your back nice and strong. Once again, it improves your balance and coordination. Those of us, especially as we get older, we start to lose our balance and coordination. We lose the ability to do a deadlift because we have to shift our body weight over our feet. So it can be quite challenging. Lots of core strength required. Very challenging on our cardiovascular health because of how many muscles are working. If you do a set of singles, so let's say 5 sets of singles at maybe 90% of your max, you'll know how much of a strain it can be on your cardiovascular system. So you're short of breath, you're sweating, your heart's racing. It requires a lot of energy because of this, and just like a squat, it's easy to overload, meaning it's very easy to stack on lots of weights and to really load the resistance and overload the resistance, right? Which is what we want, right? So we want to be able to move some heavy weights. And if you think of the world record for the deadlift, held by Eddie Hall at this stage, is currently at 500 kilos. 500 kilos, half a ton being pulled on a deadlift. Huge numbers. Right, so what is a deadlift? Of course, I like the neurodevelopmental. I love looking at how babies move. And this is probably one of the only pictures I could find online which highlighted a deadlift position. So you can see how this baby here, it's going through a hip hinge. Now let's talk about a hip hinge. Hip hinge meaning, like a hinge on a door, right? So let's say this point right here, that's where we want our movement to be. And for a lot of us, we are unable to isolate the movement of the hip hinge, right? So one of the very basic principle movements that you should be able to do is to fold at the hips. And, a lot of us think, I'm going to go touch my toes. But essentially that's testing the hip hinge. So we can see this baby here doing a nice hip hinge. We could see differently to the squat, but the shin is now vertical, whereas the squat, we had the squat where the shin was parallel to the spine. So, if we look over to this image, we can see that the shins are more parallel. Now, out of 1, 2, 3, we like being at this Number 2 image, we like to be in this number 2 for our setup, right? So this is our deadlift starting position. You can see it's very close to a squat. You know, the femur or the thigh bone is quite parallel, and you know, our tibia is quite vertical, but you know, the angle of the tibia is a little bit different to the angle of the torso and the spine. We could see this muscle here, the latissimus dorsi, or the lats. You know, the lats are engaged. The humerus bone or the arm bone is nice and close to the body. If you compare that to this, where the humerus and then the spine, it makes it quite a large angle, right? So this is a common area which we'll go through, where the hips rise first or the knees extend first, while the bar hasn't cleared the knees yet. So, you know, if you've got some engineering mind, you can imagine there's a lot more load going through this position here, right? Here, yeah, once again, the hips are raised, but now the body is more over the center of our feet here. So this is a little bit more quad dominant, where we've gone over. This one is once again a little bit more quad dominant, but we've actually lifted our hips up, and then it's going to put so much load through the back. So this is the optimal starting position here. Chest is up, eyes are forward, the spine is nice and long and neutral. How do we deadlift? Well, there's a 3-phase movement. You know, we've got this guy here, straight out of Wikipedia, images courtesy of Wikipedia. Phase 1, you know, the lift off the ground, right? So with the lift off the ground, ideally we want the toes pointing forward, but you know, this guy probably deadlifts a lot more than me, so he's probably well and fine to have his toes out like this. So lift off the ground, you know, we want the tension to be out of the bar, so it's not a jerk. We don't like to jerk the bar. We like to take the tension away from the bar, stay nice and strong to the belly, and lift. We can see that his head is relatively neutral, so he's not cranking his head up. You know, see in this position, he's more cranking his head up. So we like to keep our head nice and neutral, and you know, we're trying to really lift our chest up to the sky, trying to have our chest proud. So you know, phase 2 is when we clear the knees. So ideally, we want to push the bar off the ground, or push the ground away as we lift the bar up to the knees. And then once we pass the knees, we really execute this strong hip hinge, where we really puff the chest up to the sky and achieve phase 3, which is our lockout, right? So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Now, how can an easy way to progress the deadlift is to take away the phases. So we can do something like a rack pull, where we pull from phase 2. Maybe we'll have the bar on like a box, or maybe the arms of a squat rack, and we could pull from here to achieve lockout, because sometimes we don't have the mobility to get to the bottom floor yet, So that's how we do the deadlift in 3 phases. Right, how to fix the deadlift. So this is straight out of FMS. So if you'd like more information, go Google the FMS, or the functional movement screen toe touch. Essentially, what we want to do in a deadlift is be able to touch our toes. And for a lot of us, you know, we put up a barrier and say, nah, I can't touch my toes. And I challenge you to work on touching your toes. Now, there's a whole pathway of clinical ways to touch your toes. You know, we can try to take away gravity and get you sitting on a floor and try to touch your toes, and you might be able to. But as soon as you stand up, you might not be able to touch your toes. And one reason for that is a lack of stability. And you might have heard me talking about that in our squat video, where if you're lacking core stability, so, you know, don't confuse that with, let's say, how many sit-ups you can do. I'm talking about if I was standing next to you and I went to push you, if you can resist my push, right? So you're not flying all over the place, you know, you've got a strong and stable core. So sometimes we lack core stability. So when we go to bend forward, you know, our muscle, let's say in our hamstring, our glutes, our lower back would tighten up and go, oh, geez, Stephen, no, I ain't going down there. So we want to give it some stability so that it can relax and be like, okay, well, hey, I can touch the toes, right? And one way to do that is to use something like a towel. So we can put a towel in between our thighs. We can squeeze the towel, and the towel will contract the adductors in the groin, which has a fascial sling, right? Fascia, Google that if you need to. So the tissue that surrounds the muscle is connected to the tissue that surrounds the abdominal muscles and the core muscles. So we can engage the adductors to engage the core muscles to give us more stability, which may allow us to fold forward more and touch our toes, right? So this is what this image here suggests. Now, this person here has their toes up, right? So of course, as they go to touch the toes, their toes will be closer to their face. They've got a gentle bend in their knees. So the key here is to bend your knees as much and as little as you need. So the main takeaway here is psychologically, I want you to learn to touch your toes, even if you need to bend your knees, and really squeeze the towel to give you more stability. And eventually we can slowly start to progress where we've got our heels lifted now, and this is a much further distance away. We've added an extra 2 or 3 centimeters because our heels are lifted. Now, this is just one strategy of many strategies, and at the end of the day, it comes down to what is causing your inability to touch your toes. So it might be a lack of stability, it might be a tissue extensibility dysfunction, so maybe you have a lack of hamstring length. However, I believe that most people have good hamstring length, but they're lacking stability. So that's why this is here, just because it's my personal belief that most people are lacking in stability. Right, stretches that can help. Well, very similar to the squat, we've got the child's pose, right? Any stretch where you're going to get your thigh closer to your chest is going to encourage that hip hinge, right? And that doing something like a child's pose can highlight any major weaknesses in your chain. So maybe your huge weakness is your knees or your hips or your lower back, and you could be able to find the weakness there. You don't need to do yoga to do a child's pose. This can be a nice stretch, even if you do it right now. Anywhere you are. There's a version you could do sitting on a chair. So if you're sitting on a chair, you can just separate your knees and just fold your body forward. You're getting your belly button closer to your thighs, and you can do this position here, having a little stretch through your hips, your low back. A glute stretch will be great to overall stretch the hips. In this position, you'll feel a glute stretch in your left hip. I'm being more specific to something like a piriformis muscle. As well, you'll be feeling a bit of a stretch in the front into muscles like the TFL, the tensor fasciae lata, where we get external rotation in the hip. So if we can get more mobility in the hips, we'll be able to complete the hip hinge more effectively. And a third option here is to do something like a deadlift, like a stiff-legged deadlift, where we're trying to keep the legs straight. We've added just a little bit of load here. And in this position, we're focusing on getting our hips behind us. We're starting to challenge our stability and challenge the difference. Our center of gravity starts to change. So lots of core strength required just to maintain this movement. And maybe you're just a beginner, and maybe this is where your spot is right now. To get better at a deadlift, maybe this is what you need to figure out the weakness in your chain. You get a really strong hamstring stretch if you do this. And of course, if you're more fancy, you can elevate the platform. So you can stand on maybe a weight plate or a box, and you can go into something more of like a Jefferson curl. You might need to Google that one. Jefferson curl, very popular in gymnastic circles, where you'd actually physically round the spine and you start strengthening the spinal erectors, and you get a really big stretch in your hamstrings. Right, teach yourself to deadlift. These are just some few basic cues. I'm just going to point out strong list deadlift. If you Google strong list deadlift, they've got a really extensive explanation on the deadlift, which you could probably spend hours reading their explanation. Free, online, strong list, give them a little look. Basic cues that I have had a lot of success with is to think about bending the bar. So if you've got either your neutral grip or your power grip, you might need to Google those ones, basically when you turn your hands over. So either grip, you can think about trying to bend the bar, and by bending the bar, you'll get more lat activation. So if we go back to this image, we can keep the bar closer to our body. And if we keep the bar closer to our body, we have a tighter center of gravity, so we're able to push more. And we'll see a common error coming up. So think about bending the bar. By bending the bar, you will also be squeezing the bar with your hands, and we know that by activating our grip strength is very closely linked to our CNS, our central nervous system. So if we can activate our grip strength, we will start triggering a chain of events just to overall increase your power output at that time. So give it a try, bend the bar. Second one is to think about pushing the floor away from you, right? So pushing the floor away from you. So when you're standing there, think about maybe pushing the earth away from you, and you're on top of the earth and you're pushing the ground away, right? And finally, final one about breath. Normally, I don't like cueing breathing because it can get quite complicated. You know, if I'm telling you, hey, Sandy, breathe in here, breathe out here, breathe in here, hold your breath, go, it gets confusing, especially if you're a beginner. It can be a lot to think about. However, in a deadlift, it can be important to breathe, right? And be timing our breath in the correct sequence because we can get a very sudden a loss in blood pressure. So if we are lifting close to our max, 80, 90, 95% of our 1 rep max, the changes in our posture can elicit rapid changes in our blood pressure, and you can feel the effects of nausea or even dizziness. And there are some videos of people even collapsing from that. So what I'd like you to do, the most important thing is this second part is to breathe out at the top. So at the bottom, we might like to take a nice big breath in. You prepare, you get nice and tight through the belly. And as you start pushing the ground away, once you get to the top, you have a nice breath out. All right, you've allowed your body to reset almost, and then you've lowered the bar down, right? So they're my top 3 cues. Of course, there are dozens and dozens of cues to fix minor, and major other issues in your deadlift. Touching this briefly, how to progress at deadlift. Yep, so you can start on maybe phase 2, where you use like the arms of a squat rack. We call this maybe a partial deadlift, or a power, a rack pull, sorry. Some people call it a rack pull, where you just pulled the weight off of there. Now, if you are playing around with the rack pull, you will find that you'll be able to deadlift more from the arms because you've cut the movement in half. And here, really overload the hips and a lot of these erector spinae. So if you're struggling to do a deadlift well off the floor, or you've got lots of lower back pain with your deadlift, maybe this might be an option for you, and you can slowly start to, lower these arms down, lower and lower and lower as you get closer and closer to the floor, right? Maybe you're just using the arms, but that's okay. That's okay. You might just be using the bar, and that's okay. All right, common errors. This is straight out of T Nation. So if you Google common errors in T Nation, this is where these images are, and this is just a Google image here. Now I'll start with this one here. I wanted to talk about having tension in the bar. So when you go to lift, before the weight actually clears off the ground, I want you to have tension in the bar. You've taken slack off the bar. So you can see this lifter here. I think this is Z, the strongman. You can see how these plates are off of the ground, so he's got tension on there where these plates are on. So he's starting to get tight through his body. He's got a nice big breath in, nice and tight, and he's pulled the slack out of the bar, and he's preparing to pull. So be careful that we're not just jerking the bar. That's just you're gonna lose power. And if you're doing sets of 6, even 6, or up to 10, you're just leaking power. And you're just going to get fatigued very quickly, and that's when you start getting sprains through your lower back, and the muscle gets really angry, and it can be quite sore. So get the tension out of the bar. Starting up here, we want to start with the bar nice and close to the body. So if we once again look at the femur compared to the humerus compared to the torso, we've got quite a large angle. So we want to start with this bar nice and close up against the shins here. And if this athlete was to get the bar nice and close to his shins, he lowers his chest down, this is chest up, a little bit more this position. But now, if we go to this extreme other case, this position here would mimic a squat. So I want you to understand and visualize the difference between a squat, where this would be more of a squat, and a deadlift, where the chest is a little bit more over the bar. And, if we look at the arm here, we want the shoulders to be more here, so the shoulders are completely straight. So be careful that we're not just squatting a bar. A common thing that might be happening is the bar hitting your knees. So as you lift up, this bar right here would clip your knees and you get big cuts and scratches. That is a telltale sign for me as a coach that you are squatting the deadlift, okay? So if you're getting lots of scratches on your knees and you have to physically move the bar in a circular motion to clear your knees, you're squatting the bar. Here, it shows that this image shows that we have lifted the hips. We've lifted the hips, and now we're doing more of this stiff-legged deadlift, right? Which is fine if you're doing a Romanian deadlift or the stiff-legged deadlift. But when we go to lift, we want the bar to be moving straight up, right, the knees gently start to straighten, and once the bar hits the part of our knees, then we can go into phase 2 where we can start lifting the hips up higher and pulling the hips forward. So now, right now, the slack has been taken completely out of that, or mostly out of the hamstrings, and we're really smashing the glutes, and the lower back and the spinal erectors have to work really hard to keep yourself stable. And finally here, we can look at this image where we've got a hyperextension, right? So he's pulled too much. And now, instead of having an isometric hold in the erector spinae through the back, so we want these muscles to stay at a consistent length. Now the muscle has contracted, right? Which suggests that, you know, this athlete might be more dominant through the lower back, right? So if you've got too much strength in your lower back, it wants to take over, which for a lot of us, we have really strong lower backs, and it wants to take over compared to our hips, right? So we need to teach our hips to do this movement. So if you've got so much tension in your back that you're pulling, of course your brain goes, okay, keep pulling, and once you get to the top, it over pulls, right? And that's where we get this position here. So ideally, we want to be in a nice, long, tall position when we stand up tall, right? Deadlift, bread and butter movement. It should be one of the staples of every training program. We can easily modify the deadlift to work around injuries, and even if you are injured, you can do a deadlift. Now, there's lots of ways that we can scale the deadlift. A very simple way is to try a single leg deadlift. That will really challenge lots of aspects in the deadlift, and there's a whole host of things that we can try and play around with. So hopefully you found this video interesting. If you have any questions, please post them. I want to be able to help you, and I want you to do a deadlift. I want you to do a deadlift safely and lift some big weights like this guy right here. Great. Thanks, guys. Hope you had fun.